Hi everyone, welcome to episode number 35 of the Bill Podcast, and today we will be talking about Capistrano, which is a remote multi-server automation tool. And because we can access remotely to various servers, very often it is also used for deployment. Before we get on to doing tasks with Capistrano, let's review some of the websites that will come in handy for us to pick up Capistrano. So obviously the very first one is capistranorb.com, which will give us many useful links. Next is, of course, the GitHub repository, which will not only show us a source code, but also how to get started with a wiki page as well as some dependencies. The next one is the wiki page itself, and over here we will go through the getting started page, which will give us some of the basics and understanding behind the principles of Capistrano, and of course various other links. And lastly, there are some task lists as well, such as deploy, check, cleanup. We'll be using some of them in the course of the episode as well. And finally, there is the getting started wiki page that we'll be going through and learn the basics of Capistrano. And finally, let's go through some resources. Now, Capistrano requires a lot of prerequisites. The very first one we should definitely know are some bash commands and be comfortable with the command line. And because Capistrano is using SSH to log into remote servers, whether it is to just execute some commands or even deploy through Git commands, you need to know the concept of SSH. For example, how do we create public and private keys, and how do we log in remotely to another server? And because I've used Amazon AWS EC2, it's also good to know AWS and EC2. And finally, of course, you should be knowing Git and GitHub if you want to do some deployments. So the very first thing we will do is come back to our command line, and I'm here in my desktop, which is completely empty except for two folders. So I have used here the ls command to simply execute what are the two folders. This, by example, is a very simple command. But let's say you want to execute this simple ls command in various other virtual computers or servers sitting out there elsewhere. Well, this is exactly how Capistrano can come in handy. Let me just go inside the folder 1-simple, which is obviously, once again, it has nothing inside. And let me just open this up in Sublime Text. And there you go. So we have a brand new folder with nothing inside. The very first thing I will do is create a new file and call it cap file. And this is where we will be writing and coding out the task for Capistrano. But even before we do that, let's come back to the command line and check for some of the dependencies that are important for Capistrano. The very first one will be RubyGem, and if you have installed it, you can just check whether it's available with a version check. So for me, yes, it is available, and I have RubyGem version 2.0.0. The next one is obviously you have to install the RubyGem called Capistrano, which is just gem install Capistrano. I have already done that. So in order to check whether it's available, we will do gem list Capistrano. And yes, I have that available, and it is version 2.14.2. Finally, the last command that we will run after Capistrano is installed is simply cap-h, and once we did that, it will give us a helpful list of commands that we can run with Capistrano. Alright, so looks like we are all set to go. So once again, we have only two folders in our desktop, and let me just go inside the 1-simple folder, which is obviously empty as of now. So let me just open this up in Sublime Text. And there you go. Over here, I will firstly create a simple file and call it cap file. And here we will write all our Capistrano tasks. So once again, Capistrano is a simple way to execute commands in multiple servers. So for example, let's say we have this command called ls, which will basically list the files. What we will try to do is log into a server and execute ls right into the home directory. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll come back to my Capistrano and say task, and then I'll just give it a name called list files. Sorry, not last files, but list files. And then I'll also give it the name for the hosts to log into, and then I can just say example.com or an IP address, and then I will do, and then in this case we'll just run ls. So that looks pretty good to me. But obviously, since we do not have access to example.com, I'm going to do a slight little hack. So let's go to System Preferences, and we will try to SSH into the machine we are using right now. That's right. If we come to System Preferences and go under Sharing and click Remote Login, this will give us the IP address. So that is 10.0.1.22 in our case. So I'm going to use just that. Instead of example.com, I'm going to use this. So basically what will happen is it's going to log into my same computer in the home directory and run ls. And guess what? We should get back this exact same reply. So I'm going to come back to the file, or rather the folder containing the cap file. And then I'm going to say cap and then the task name, which was list files in our case. Let's see what happens. And that's it. There you see, it's even listing all the reply, which is basically the same as this. Let's try something different, which is basically ls minus al, and we can also do the same. So let me just clear the screen and do cap list files. That's right, it gives me all the replies ls minus al. Pretty cool, isn't it? Now obviously this is not powerful enough if we are just executing one type of task. Why don't we try to do another one? So let's say I'm just going to copy and paste, and this time I will just say who is user, and this time I will say echo $user. So what's happening is I'm going to log into the same computer, but I'm going to execute a different task. So in this case, if I come back and then run cap whois_user, it's going to do the same thing. And there you go. It's giving me the reply about who is user. So obviously, let's say you have 5 tasks and you are logging into the same computer. It is definitely not efficient for us to keep writing this. So for that, won't it be nice to define the server right at the top? Yes, we can do that. So we'll do role and then :libraries. And over here, we will define the IP address or the server name. And after we do this, guess what? We can take out all of this. So I'm just going to delete it, and that's it. So let's go ahead and try that once again. So this time I will do cap list files and it will do exactly the same. There you go. But the good thing is we are declaring the server name just once, so we can have many tasks that is linked to just one server. Now obviously this won't be as useful if we are doing it just for one computer or one server. Won't it be nice if you can add one more? Let's say example.com or comma something else and more servers. Well, yes, we can do that. Now this time I'm going to add in a computer that is sitting right in my living room. So let me just add that, and it has an IP address of 0.20. So this is where it becomes really powerful. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the roles and say that, hey, this one, please execute it with servers called libs. I'll just bring the do right at the end. Right, so that looks pretty cool to me. So basically what it does is that we have a different task, but we are going to run it simultaneously one after another in different servers. So let's try that. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to do cap list files, but this time it will run in 2 computers. So let's see. And yes, there you go. We are doing it in both the servers. So first on, as you can see, it's 0.20. You will see that 0.22 is also being executed. So it is pretty powerful, isn't it? Now let's say for the task who is user, you only want one of the servers to be able to execute it. So for this one, we can actually create another role. So let's say here we will do, let's say info, and then I'm just going to add in 10.0.1.20, and instead of libs here, I'm going to put in info. So in this case, it will run the task whois_user, but it will only go through the group of servers that are defined inside info. So I'm going to do cap and then whois_user, and it should definitely do it only inside 0.20 and not 0.22. If we want to list out all the tasks that are defined in the cap file, we can just do cap-big T And here they will give you cap invoke and cap shell. And here it will also say some tasks are not listed because they have no description. So why don't we go ahead and add them? So let's come back here and I'm going to add in description here. So DESC, and let's just say list all files. And I'm going to come back here also and say list the username. Right, so that's about it. And now when I come back and do cap-t once again, guess what? I will have all the functions, or rather all the tasks listed here, especially that are tasks that are defined by us with clear descriptions. Right, so I hope this simple introduction kind of gives us an overview about how we can run command line commands in various servers. That's pretty powerful enough, but mostly Capistrano is almost always used for deployments, and we're going to do that the next. So I have already created an empty folder, so let's just go inside that, and we will use basically an EC2 server, a new EC2 server. We will pull in the repository from a GitHub repository, and we will try to update our EC2 server with a task called Capistrano deploy. The very first thing I will do is create a new repository in GitHub. So let me go ahead and create that. All right, that looks good. So I'm going to create a repository. So inside my folder, I'm just going to create a new folder and call it project. And inside here, let me just create the new index.html. So I'm going to call it index.html. Very simple. Capistrano GitHub EC2 demo. Hello world in that. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. So inside my command line, let me just go inside the project and let me do a git init, git add, git commit, which is just an initial commit, and add a git remote URL. And finally, I'll do a git push origin master. So after it's done, if we come back to the GitHub URL, refresh it, there you go, we have our new project with index.html. So looks like our repository is all ready. Next, we will create the Capistrano task. So let me just go one folder up. So let's just see what's in our folder once again. So there you see we have a project folder, and inside the project folder we have index.html, and this project folder is a GitHub repository. So over here I will create some Capistrano tasks. So to do that, I'll do capify and dot. Right, cool. So now let's look at the folder structure once again. What capify dot did is create the familiar cap file. Then it created a folder called config, and inside that I have deploy.rb. Let's go ahead and look at those files. So there you go. I have cap file that just says load deploy and load config-deploy, which is right here. So here they are, a bunch of code. Now just for the sake of clarity, I'm just gonna clear out all the comments so that we clearly see what's going on. So over here it's just loading up the file deploy. That seems pretty clear. And let's just go inside deploy.rb. Now here I'm gonna take it step by step. So I'm just gonna delete everything so that we can start from scratch. The very first thing we will set is the application name. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm gonna name it as, let's say, cap-github-ec2. Next, I'm gonna set the deploy folder. So I'm gonna set it, so deploy_2, and in EC2 later on we will download Apache server, and through Apache HTML pages are usually served through this folder called var/www/html. Type of version control, so I'm going to set SCM. In our case it is Git, so that is pretty clear too. So let's next set the repository, and over here I will copy and paste the GitHub URL. So let me just go back here. This is the URL that I'll copy, come back to my deploy.rb and paste it right here. And next I will set the SCM username. Next I'm gonna set the location name. For this, let me just keep it blank for now so that when we create the EC2 server, I'll just copy and paste it here. And after this, I'll just refer to a bunch of things. For example, where the role application will refer to the location, role web will also refer to the location. We don't have any databases, so probably we can just delete this one. And then we also have the user, which in our case will be the EC2 user. Later you'll see why and how. And finally, I will set in the SSH option keys where it is stored. So we will take it with ec2.pm files. So later on, we will also see how how we can generate that, or if you already have an SSH URL, you can even refer to this. And lastly, I will just put in some default run options. Finally, just a little bit of helpful configurations. I will say that, hey, please get it from the master branch and set it to SCM verbose so that we see what's going on in our command line. Great, so looks like our deploy.rb is ready except for the location, which we will now set up through EC2. So for EC2, let's go to the AWS management console and I will very simply launch an instance, right? So let's continue with the classical wizard. I'll just choose the very first one, which is also a free tier, and we can continue. So over here, let's give it a name and a value. So we can just say, and just some description, a demo. And here is the key pair that you can use. So either you can generate a new key pair, or you can just choose from the existing one. I'll just choose an existing one, and I'll also create a security group and continue and launch. Great, so looks like our instance is all ready. So I'm just gonna check box it right here. And the very first thing I will do is go ahead and copy the public DNS. So I'm going to copy this, come back to my cap file and paste it in the location. We have the public DNS address. Let's just make sure that our public key is ready here. So I'm just going to come back to my terminal and ls-al.ssh ec2. Do ensure that you have the right permissions, which is only read and write access. So to do that, we'll do ssh-i, location of the public key. So for that, it will be wherever it is located, usually in .ssh and then ec2.pm. This is the location of the public key, and then it will be ec2-user, and we will copy the public DNS. Right, so that's how we will log in. So I'm going to click enter and hope everything is good. Yes, if you're doing it for the first time, it will be added. And that's right, we are inside the virtual computer that EC2 has created for us. So the very first thing we will do is install Git. So to do that, we'll do sudo yum install Git. Why are we installing Git once again? Because we want Git clone or some kind of Git command to take our report repository from GitHub and download it into this server. And there you go, the Git version is 1.7.4.5. The next thing we will install is the Apache server, so that when we download the index.html, other people can see our web page. So for that, we'll do sudo yum install httpd. And there you go, Apache server has been installed. Now let's go ahead and visit our public DNS and see what is going on there. As you can see, it is not available because we did not start the Apache server. So let's go ahead and start that. So to do that, we'll do sudo service httpd and then start. If everything is good, it will give us a status called OK. We can also do the same thing, and we can do status. It should give us that, hey, it is running. That looks good. So now when I come back to the EC2 public DNS and refresh, that's right, it should give us the default test page powered by Apache. So here's the thing that's happening. From this computer that we created in EC2, we'll have to git clone the GitHub repository. So to do that, it needs an SSH access into GitHub. So for this, we will create some SSH configurations and public and private keys. So I'll first go inside the home directory folder.ssh. And if you kind of list it, it should be complete empty except for, of course, the authorized keys file. And over here, we will create the public and the private keys. So that will be ssh-keygen-t rsa-f. Let's create the name. So for this, we'll just say learncap and -c and then just the email. Great. Now after this, we will have to create a config file so that we can store the GitHub information. So I'll just say touch config, and let me just edit the config file. So I'll just use a very simple editor called nano, and here I will add in the host name, which is github.com, and the identity file will be .ssh learncap that we just created. Right, so that looks good. So I'm going to exit it. Next, we will add in the SSH public key information to GitHub. So to do that, we will first cat the learn_cap.public key so that we can get the information inside, which is all of this. So let's just copy all of this. Now I will come back to GitHub, the same repository, and let's go under settings right here to deploy keys and add a deploy key. And here you can say that EC2 demo Capistrano, and I'm going to paste it right in and add key. Alright, so there you go. EC2 demo Capistrano, the public key has been added. Now after this is done, let's test whether it is added properly. So to do that, we'll just do ssh-big-T git@github.com. Oops, sorry, it will give us a bad configuration. So let's just change the permissions. So to do that, we'll do chmod 600. Right, so let's try the SSH into GitHub once again. And yep, I can log in, enter the passphrase. Yep, you have successfully authenticated. This just means that if this computer, which is EC2, wants to git clone a remote repository from GitHub, it will be allowed through SSH. Looks like we are all ready. What else there's left to do? Yes, we also have to ensure some permissions are set. So let's go on to the folder from which it will be downloaded to. So that is obviously var/www HTML, and I'm gonna make EC2 the owner of this folder. So I'm gonna do sudo chown-r EC2 user and :EC2 user. So this will set the owner to EC2 user and not the root, and a dot to say this entire folder. Alright, so that looks good. And finally, we have to do some Apache configurations. So let's go ahead and open up the configuration file, which is sudo nano once again, the text editor. And it is in the folder /etc httpd conf/httpd.conf. So over here, I'm gonna look at the line that tells the directory. So there you go. This is my document root. So usually what Capistrano will do is it will git clone the repository into the folder HTML, but it will have some folders such as shared and current. So it's gonna reside inside current. And also I'm going to do a little bit change right at the bottom, which is right here as well. And I'm going to point this one to /current/public. Now, where did I get this information from? Once again, if you go back to the wiki page on getting started with Capistrano and go to from the beginning, here you will see the deployment directory structure, and this is exactly what I was talking about. So imagine this is our HTML folder. So it will create a few folders such as releases, shared, and the current is the one that it will relate to. As you can see here, then the current symbolic link will be updated to point to that directory, and this is where the new version will be placed. And that's exactly what we did in the Apache configuration to ask it to point Apache server to this folder. Alright, so that's a little bit of link to Capistrano and the Apache server configuration. And I'm just going to save this. And after this, I'm just going to stop the Apache server and start it once again. So for that, I will do sudo service httpd stop, right? And I'm just going to start it once again. Alright, so here it is failing because it says that it must be a directory. So why don't we go ahead and make the deployment so that the directories are created? So for that, we will come back to our local computer where the Capistrano tasks are indicated, and over here I will do cap deploy and then setup just to ensure that everything is working fine. It should be fine, fingers crossed. Alright, looks like it is good, and I realize that I have a little error here, so it should be deploy, not deployed. Come back to the command line in my local machine where the cap file is defined, and then I'll do cap deploy once again. And yes, looks like it is getting the GitHub repository and it's going into the right directories var www.html. And now let's come back to our EC2 instance, and over here let's start the Apache server. So sudo service httpd stop, and let me start it. And just to check that everything is fine, I'm gonna check the status. Yep, it is running. So let's go back to our Amazon EC2 web page and refresh it. And there you go. We see the Hello World in Capistrano EC2. Associated with Capistrano, I also took help of some blog posts. For example, deploying to a VPS with Capistrano. Can check this out. As well as the Capistrano handbook itself that gives us much more details into various tasks and configurations. And this is the one also I took help from in order to learn how I can do that with EC2, GitHub, and Capistrano. And finally, the various Capistrano tasks and the wiki page on it. For example, we did use cap deploy. These are some of the Capistrano tasks that are already done for us, and we can use it off the shelf. And finally, for the build link of the week, it's a very different one. It's actually inside a Chrome browser, and if you visit Chrome://credits, it will give us this list of all the URLs. And I thought this was really interesting to not only know what are the technology that are used behind a Chrome browser, but also these little nuggets of applications and code base itself. For example, as you can see here, there are some right over here called FFmpeg that is used, that I also use for some video manipulations. There is there is GIMP toolkit for image manipulation, and seriously, there's so much more. So go ahead and have fun with these apps and know a little bit about how Chrome browser works. And that's it for this week's episode of Build Podcast, episode number 35. For all other episodes, do check out build-podcast.com and subscribe through one of the channels that you wish. So I'll see you next week with another episode of Build Podcast. Goodbye.